This is Listen Up Podcasting for student expression. I am so glad to have you here with me. It says my meeting is being recorded. Okay, so welcome. Let's get started. So I am broadcasting from the Northeast. I live in Stamford, Connecticut, and I teach in Westchester, New York. I'm an adjunct professor at Manhattanville College in the literacy department. I also am an 8th grade middle school English teacher in Rye, New York. And I will put my slide deck up for you on my blog, theteachingfactor.com. Welcome. Amy says she was born in Mamaroneck, close by. This is awesome. But I love virtual events because we get to meet people from all over the place and come together with our shared idea. So I will remind you again that you'll have access to my slide deck after the presentation. But we're here to talk for the next 50 minutes about podcasting and setting up podcasting with your students. And if you have any questions, type them in the chat. I am going to answer your questions throughout, and I'll also leave time for questions at the end as well. So right now, there are more than 1 million active podcasts that we have access to as listeners, and more than 30 million podcast episodes in over 100 languages. So our students are gaining, and even as critical consumers of information, we're not only getting information from print text and books these days, we're learning from podcasts as well as media like videos and images as well. And I don't know about you, but I am a avid podcast listener on my way to work, when I am out walking. What are your favorite podcasts? What do you like to listen to? I put some of my favorite ones right on the bottom here. Radio Lab, that's what got me started into podcasts. Code Switching, yes, that's a great one. Serial was another one. I am a Tim Ferriss junkie, and Malcolm Gladwell also. I see American Scandal. Bowery Boys, I don't know that one. A British history podcast. That sounds good. Syntax Web, developing podcasts. You know, there are podcasting in so many genres, in so many formats that are so great to listen and learn from, to be informed, to gain new information and how-tos. And we can really use this not only as listeners, but also to have our students start creating their own podcasts and be podcasters themselves. So in terms of thinking about podcasts for young people, there are so many out there. So podcasts aren't only for adults anymore. And here's a collection of some really great podcasts that are specifically for, I'll say, anywhere from like 5-year-olds and older, throughout middle school, like Mars Patel, which is a great story-based one. NPR has All Songs Considered, or even a collection of short stories and asking those why questions or science-based questions with brains on. So we can absolutely be using podcasts for listening. And I just want to talk a moment about using it as a text to listen to, because I have this triple framework here that I have like borrowed and adapted from a program and a curriculum called Image, Sound, and Story. And that comes from the Jacob Burns Film Center in in New York and in Pleasantville, New York, and they specifically work with video and film creation with young people. But the more I look at their framework, we can completely 100% adapt this for our own students to podcasting, because our text, rather than film or digital or print text, is that podcast. And our students are listening and comprehending and analyzing these audio texts, and those texts through the listening become models and mentors that they can start to apply language and vocabulary of podcasting. They can be critically responsive to these different texts. And then from the listening, we work into creating, where our students are creative communicators. They're creating their own podcasts. They are showcasing their creativity, their imagination. And that also blends with the connecting, because we're building on the listening and the creating skills to really practice communication skills, be empathetic, celebrate the diversity and the commonality of the perspectives of all of our students, and become thoughtful and curious media consumers. When we think about this in connection to the ISTE standards, and we look at the specific standards, our students, when they are creating podcasts, are empowered learners. They are global collaborators. They are the creative communicators. They're using digital citizenship. They're knowledge constructors, where they are learning how to not only communicate, but to use communication in a way to inform or persuade or entertain and share on a global level their own thinking and ideas. So are we ready and set to podcast? And how do we start, or where do we start with our students and in using this in our classrooms? Whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're an adjunct professor and you're doing this with your own college students, or if you are also, like me, a middle school, secondary teacher, how can we get students to create their own podcast and show us what they know and share their expertise? So first things first, I talked about our own model and mentor podcast. We can use those as I'll say, a text in our classrooms to really help to flush out what is a podcast, what are the elements of a podcast, and what do we need to include in our own podcast. In my particular 8th grade classroom, my students have multiple opportunities to create podcasts. In the beginning of the year, they do investigative journalism pieces, which they then create into a podcast. So they might be writing about pollution and plastic pollution. They might be talking about mental health, but they are looking at and creating an investigative piece that they where they uncover details and information, sort of the way that Serial or Radiolab does that in their podcast. And then recently in the wintertime, my students write murder mystery pieces, which follows along with the podcasting series Lethal Lit, which is a fictional based teen mystery genre. But that Lethal Lit becomes our, what I call a mentor text for us to study and to understand, how it's set up. What are the things and the elements that we need to bring in our own mysteries to help us to create an effective mystery via podcast rather than writing it as a short story. Maybe it includes sound effects. What sort of editing elements do we need to bring in to leave our listeners on a cliffhanger, or add in multiple voices? So we can look to different models and mentors of podcasts in order to help us understand what we need to create and include in our own podcasts. And if you're going to scaffold that, you might consider like a graphic organizer or response sheet for students to capture their thinking about the podcast that they're listening to, and figuring out, what those elements are that they can in turn put into their own pieces. So here's just an example. I mentioned the Lethal Lit podcast. I have my students, I've prepared them with a listening guide depending on what the task is. In this case, Lethal Lit is a 6 episode series. So I gave them a listening guide to follow along and to fill in some notes. I show them how they can listen to it on any of their own podcast devices. And then they're with in addition to listening to it, they were also creating their own assignment, completing their own assignment about it to showcase their understanding and apply it to their own mystery novels. So thinking about podcast genres, I've described for you 2 particular genres that I do with my own students, but there are so many other genres of podcasts that you might consider having your students create. As educators, we all have our favorite educational podcasts that we listen to. Learning like class tech tips, or ditch that textbook. Somebody mentioned Teach Thought. A lot of educators are moving to creating their own podcasts that are informational, that are interview based. But there are also podcasts that are just comedy and news or sports and politics and sci-fi, or you have something like the Moth Radio Hour where it's all storytelling. So once you decide, or your students decide, what is that genre that your podcast is going to be in, then you can start to plan out the podcast that you're going to create. So possible podcast projects for students can be like the book versus the movie, which was better. You can do a Radio Lab style informative inquiry about a topic of like, do aliens exist? Or, who is the stronger superhero, Batman or Superman? Yes, my students actually did that one. You can create a suspenseful podcast with like Lethal Lit. It could be with gothic horror, mystery, or even based in like an unsolved mystery today. Personal narratives, memoirs, like I mentioned, the Moth Radio Hour, that's great for podcasting and storytelling. You could do poetry podcasts. If you want history based, like On This Day in 1941. There is a great website and platform called Wonderopolis that is super for kids in students in grades K through 12. And every day they share like a wonder of the day. What are gummy bears actually made of? Or why are fire hydrants red? What if students tackled a specific wonder they had and created their own Wonderopolis podcast series? I'm all about food. I don't know about you. Maybe it's because lunchtime is coming up. But what about the idea of the recipe of me, where students are creating memoirs, sharing recipes, or even doing food reviews about the food in the school cafeteria. You can, my son is obsessed with the breakdowns and the Easter eggs for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision. I don't know if anybody else is a huge Marvel fan here, but have students do a breakdown of their own favorite show or book or song. So, this is just a handful of ideas. You can have your students come up with their own specific project and podcast show idea, or you can decide upon that based on like what you're studying in class. That's really up to you. So going back, just as an example, here is with my 8th graders when we did our citizen journalism quest. And the mission was to create this podcast recording. Here you have just like the little story behind the unit that my students were doing, and then all the different pieces to help them build that podcast. We talked about ethos, pathos, and logos. I wanted them to utilize ethos, pathos, and logos in their podcast. They collected evidence. It was all evidence-based. And then they had to turn that evidence into an annotated bibliography or an infographic to display their findings in a different way. We talked about text structures and attention grabbing, hooks and transitions. These were all little mini lessons or activities to help them build that podcast and the podcast recording. So after you've listened to your models and your mentors, you've picked your genre and your style, then it's all about planning, outlining. Even for our students, it might be helpful to draft out their entire podcasting script before recording. I know that Tim Ferriss, when he sits down with an interview, he's not going completely cold. He has his glass of wine next to him and his series of questions or quotes that help him to prepare and speak off of his notes in recording that podcast. So the planning stage is when our students are doing preliminary research on their topic, outlining key points. Maybe the students, you can help your students by providing the necessary scaffolds or graphic organizers. Here I gave you a link to one that I made with my students for their investigative journalism piece. But when we revise our ideas and when we outline our ideas, it allows us to look back at it, reflect on it, revise it to make sure that the words and our word choice is really going to communicate the message and the central idea of our podcast. So once we have our plan, once we have our script, then we're looking to record. Okay. And this part is where we need to have a lesson about presentation, about voice. Maybe there's a little speech element here that we're including, because we want our students to share their podcast with an engaged and enthusiastic voice. Not saying that we need to have spirit fingers like we're cheerleaders, but we want to present it in a way that's going to engage our listeners, not make our listeners strain to hear what we're saying. So before we even record, we want to practice. I tell my students to practice as many times as you need to feel comfortable, and even record and re-record. I don't know about you, but when I'm doing a flip video or making something for my class, I never, never have I ever like sat down and in one first time shot given a perfect presentation where I'm happy with that video. And I want my students to understand that when they're recording that you have the opportunity to practice and re-record if you need to. If they're interviewing something, we want to make sure the person interviewed is speaking into the microphone loud and clear. I can tell you that a lot of times I have sent my students back many times to re-record, or then we talk about editing and picking out that sound bite of that perfect element, whether they're making a video or for the podcast. Um, so absolutely. So, but yes, re-recording, it's okay. And we know that, there are multiple takes until we get it to a level where we want it to be. Now with podcasting, we don't need any fancy tools and equipment. A digital device is what you need. It can be a Chromebook, a tablet, a computer, an iPad. You can even be using your phone. Now, microphones and a microphone stand are not like essential. And a lot of my 8th grade students, when they're recording their podcast, are doing it right on their Chromebook, their school Chromebook. But professional podcasters say like that microphone eliminates any background noise. And that's like a huge piece to talk about with students when recording as well. I notice particularly a lot of my students who are gamers have fancy microphones already. So that's helpful. Headphones, again, not required, but could be recommended because if they're noise canceling, they can omit any distracting sound. So if you're sending students off during class time to record, you want to remind them that they're in a place where it's quiet, that all the background noise is eliminated, so we clearly hear their voice. Now, there are so many different podcasting apps that you can use. And it's really up to one, I'll say first, in terms of if you're in a K through 12 school, your internet and technology policy within your school. And then also, you could offer different ones for students if you're teaching on a college level, or even starting out as creating your own podcast as an educator. Last year, when we went into 100% remote teaching and learning at the beginning of the pandemic, I created like my own podcast of daily read alouds for my students. With that, I used Anchor. I thought that was a great, easy platform to use. In Chrome, it gave me 30 minutes of continuous recording. It was easy to edit, and there was also different sound effects. So when I wanted my students to have access to certain books, I was reading 30 minutes a day for them to listen to like a book based on a World War II unit we were doing. And I have a collection on Anchor of the books that, we didn't have access to when we left school. So Anchor is great. In my school, though, my students are not able to use Anchor because there's some permission issues with that. Audacity has been around forever. Prior to when I first started podcasting with my students more than a decade ago, when we were doing Radio Lab podcasts and I was recording their debates in my speech and debate class, I was using Audacity and making MP3 files and sharing it out. If you use an Apple or a Mac program, you can use something like GarageBand. All my students, we have Chromebooks now, and all of my students have access to Screencastify. Yes, it's a webcasting tool, but you can also have students use it to record their podcasts. And I have a lot of students they'll just create a title slide and then use the microphone and record it through Screencastify, and it saves it right into their Google Drive. A sound trap is something that I use in my school, not only for podcasts, but our music lab uses it, as well as SpeakPipe is another one. But basically, there are so many different podcasts that you can use. Um, Trisha, yes, Anchor is easily accessible. Again, you have to look at your technology and internet policies in your school, depending where you are. If it were my college students, I would recommend Anchor for anybody wanting to start out with creating a podcast. But like I said, for my own students, Soundtrap, Screencastify, those are great tools to use as well. So editing, we've recorded our podcast, and now we want to think about, does it sound the way that I want it to sound? Am I effectively communicating to my listeners what I want to communicate? How can I enhance the podcast for my listeners' enjoyment, I'll say. And this is where editing comes into play. I say and a lot, and I don't finish that sentence. So maybe I want to edit that out. Maybe I want to remove some unwanted noises. I can add some sound effects to it to propel the story or to suggest something with for my listeners. Using something like Soundtrap and even Screencastify and Anchor, you're able to actually edit your podcast. And when it comes to editing, you might even teach your students and talk about diegetic and non-diegetic sounds, something that we see in film as well as podcasts. And Limetown is a great example where they are adding all these non-diegetic sound effects to take us into the story of their podcast. This is an example of part of a mini lesson that I gave with my 8th graders to talk about what are the best sound effects that are going to propel and emphasize the topics that we are talking about in our podcast, whether it's story-based or informative-based. Do we want to add some intro music? Is there some transition music from one idea to the next? And what's our outro music? And when it comes to thinking about the sound effects and finding copyright free sound clips and music, you can look at something like Premium Beat or Purple Planet Music, a Zap Splash. Those are great as well. Like I said, Anchor, Soundtrap, they have their own sound effects that you can use. And then we also talk about, copyright rules. If you are or want to include a piece of music, that you can use 10% of that in your piece. And it's very interesting to see my own students' choices to think about the different sound effects or music that they want to use to set the mood and the tone for the podcast, because that's really what music is doing. It's not just propelling the listener's enjoyment, it's also setting a mood and a tone for their podcast. So once we have the podcast created, now it's time to share it. Okay. We didn't just create the podcast for us, the teacher, the educator, but we want to share it with a larger world. So, depending again on your school and the internet policy and the age of your students, you might just be sharing it on Google Classroom or your school website. Maybe you want to share it out into the world and share it with parents or a larger a larger like organization. You can even have your students enter student podcast contests. The New York Times, NPR, they have annual podcasting contests. I actually use a lot of the podcast winners from NPR as mentor texts with my students so we can understand what we want to create. And I wouldn't be a teacher if I didn't talk about rubrics and grades, because I know that's what my students are thinking about. So I want to just talk a moment about how do we evaluate these podcasts, and really, you know, that's really something that you can create, that rubric with your students. What do you want me to listen for? What do you want me to evaluate you on in terms of the podcast criteria, you know, with our investigative journalism piece, introductions, content, delivery, personality, creativity, music and sound enhancements, the technical production. Those were things that we had decided as a class to help us to understand had we met those learning targets for our students, for our grade level standards, for those 21st century skills that we're trying to meet. But you know, maybe that content weighed more than the technical production and the delivery, only because this was the first time my students were creating podcasts. So, you know, think about what you're actually measuring when students are creating these podcasts, and what skills do you want to evaluate to help them to be successful and create a podcast that is uh, worth listening to. So in terms of, just to answer your question, so my rule was always like 10% of a song, or 10% of like any any copyrighted material. I could be wrong, but that was how I was always like trained throughout like my copyright experience. That you couldn't use, like if you wanted to include like a song from Taylor Swift or Dua Lipa, like you could only use 10% of it throughout as your transition music. No more. I could be wrong though. Oh, but you shared a link. Okay, awesome. All right, so resources, where can we go? Because there's so much out there about podcasting and podcasting with our students. I mentioned that NPR, National Public Radio, they have an annual podcasting contest every year, and they have students as young as like 8 and 9 creating podcasts, which are so much fun. There was one student that she did a podcast. It was all about pickles. I thought it was hilarious. And how she loves pickles versus like some other topics to talk about, like race and class in the classroom. So they also provide a curriculum guide for educators. As I said, the New York Times Project Audio has great resources, as well as Read, Write, and Think. Podcasting 101 is a video series that you could find on YouTube. And again, they're linked in my slide deck. I'll be sharing my slide deck after the presentation today on my blog, theteachingfactor.com, and that I have that in my resources shortly. To help you to access the resources that I share. So, and also this last year, I published with ISTE a a quick resource guide to podcasting for students that has a lot more different ideas and different checklists and links to more great podcasts and podcast assignment. So when you said it is and it isn't available publicly, only within the class, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So I was just answering, somebody said, what if they're only doing their podcast and sharing it only within the class? Is it okay to use copyrighted music? And so I said, that's probably fine, as long as, again, it's restricted to the class, not publicly available. But I was just starting to type that, in my opinion, it'd be better to teach them to use the copyright free sources, because then there's no worry about them publishing it later on and getting into trouble.
Yeah, we need to have that conversation regularly with our students about like copyright and, sourcing material. And I think that's super important, that our students need to understand that you just can't like take a song and use it, or lift a line from a website and say it's yours. You want to give credit to where the credit is due. A lot of people have gotten into trouble for using copyrighted materials, whether you're talking even about like teachers pay teachers to creating podcasts. So I would stick with those copyright free images and copyright free music and sound effects to help you with that. And using something like Anchor or Soundtrap, where they have those sound effects, and even like with GarageBand or on Apple, those copyright sounds and sound effects is helpful there. So other questions. I've talked for a really long time, and I want to answer your specific questions that you have about podcasting, or ideas. How many of you are actually doing podcasts with your students or in your school? Okay, so most people are saying not yet, not yet. So we definitely, yes, we both Trisha and Ralph are saying that we listen to podcasts as resources, and definitely in composition classes and in reading and writing classes and thinking. But definitely I think it's time, especially as we're building digital citizenship among our students, to really put them in the creators seat and create their own podcast. You might not know it, but your students might already be creating podcasts, just they're not doing it for a school assignment. So other ideas in terms of that you have for podcasting projects? For my instructional technology people, think about if you created a podcast for your teachers about even just like a 10-minute, like, here's a 10-minute tip of a technology tip today that they can listen to when they start their morning. I love the idea of using it in an economics class. Let's talk about economics today. Absolutely. Children's Lit, what a great class. Use story seeds. There's also, Trisha, the Yarn. I don't know if you know that podcast series, but it's more for adults, but for your students. They're constantly interviewing young adult authors and talking about different books, but it's called the Yarn, and that's a great one. Other questions or thoughts, or is just everybody getting hungry and they want to take their lunch break? I know the people all the way out west, it's still morning time for you, but 10:30. All right. So yes, I mean there's so many different ways that you can use podcasts. Like I said, I listen to podcasts all the time. It's a great way to collect information. So here, if you have any specific questions, you can email me. My blog is theteachingfactor.com. I'm going to post up these slides so that you can access the resources. You can reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram about podcasting. But yeah, I look forward to seeing more of your podcasts. So and Brittany, I'm all about giving my students choices. So really, like, why not have them create a film or a podcast, or if they want to choose to write it, I'd say go for it. So thank you so much. It was so great to connect with all of you online this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. There are so many awesome sessions. I'm having a hard time picking a few this afternoon because I want to go to multiple, but have a great day and happy learning and podcasting.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And I echo all those thoughts. I did put a link for the session eval into the chat, and it is also available from the schedule. And so happy conference viewing and to everybody.
And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for helping moderate. And I look forward to seeing more people in different sessions.
I forgot to tell people who I was. Oh well, next time. I'm Jerry Lewis, by the way.
Are you moderating other sessions, Jerry?
Yes, I've got other sessions. I have to go look at my calendar. I think I have one more today, and I have a couple tomorrow and one on Friday. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Okay. So I was under time. I was 10 minutes early, but
Yeah. Hey, we get a few minutes.
lunch break. I know
Yeah.
somebody was at a standing desk and I was like, oh, I should be standing right now. It's so hard to sit.
Yeah. Well, I find, when I'm presenting that if I'm standing, I guess I should stop the recording. Okay.